Hey guys, tonight we're opening the creaky, cobwebbed door to a time when Halloween wasn't just a night for raiding your kid's candy stash. It was an annual festival of pure, pants-wetting terror. That's right. We're diving into why medieval people actually feared Halloween more than they feared death itself. I know, you're thinking. But I get scared just getting my credit card statement. How bad could medieval Halloween be? Worse. Much worse. Picture a world where ghosts aren't costumes, the candy is turnips, and the main event is trying not to get cursed by a vengeful grandma spirit with unfinished business. So before you get too cozy, maybe hit like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this bizarre journey. Comment below with the weirdest Halloween costume you've ever worn. Bonus points if it required an exorcism. Alright, dim the lights, flick on a fan for that soft white noise, and put away anything made of real bone. Get comfortable. Now, let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why people in the Middle Ages were convinced their dead relatives would drop by for a snack? Did anyone actually wear costumes, or did they just put on a second shirt and hope the ghosts would respect the effort? What exactly happened if you forgot to leave out a bowl of porridge for the spirits? Could you survive a medieval trick? Or was it just arson with extra steps? Did anyone have fun? Or was it all just a race to see who could barricade their door the fastest? And why? For the love of everything, were people more afraid of October 31st than actual, literal death? Congratulations. You've just woken up in the late 1300s, and it's the last night of October. You're surrounded by suspicious mists, your roof leaks, the neighbors are chanting in Latin, and you're about to discover why this night was more horrifying than a surprise visit from your landlord. Good luck. You've survived another day of mud, monotony, and chronic back pain. But tonight is different. The sun sets early, the air turns sharp, and even the bravest dog refuses to go outside. Because Halloween, or as it's known here, All Hallows Eve, is about to begin. And you, yes, you, are not ready. Let's set the scene. Imagine it's the end of October in your typical medieval village. Your home is a proud testament to questionable carpentry. A thatch roof, mud walls, and a floor that's technically just slightly inside dirt. The sun is a distant memory, replaced by an early creeping darkness that feels as heavy as the smell coming from your neighbor's pigsty. There's a chill in the air that seeps through your only cloak and settles right in your bones, like a long-term tenant who refuses to pay rent. You can hear the crows squabbling on the church roof, and every gust of wind rattles the shutters, which are bravely held in place by, let's be honest, optimism. Now, on most nights, you'd go through the usual routine, eat a bowl of pottage, hope your bread isn't growing new life, and slip into sleep while the family goat snores in the corner. But not tonight. Tonight, even the routine is anxious. The air is laced with anticipation, a little excitement, and a generous helping of fear. The village is a patchwork of shadows, each one stretching out from doorways, flickering candlelight, or just the general uncertainty of what lurks in the fog. This is not the kind of evening for late-night errands or a casual stroll to the well, unless you're in the market for a haunting, or at minimum, a reputation for being very, very reckless. Instead, you're indoors, doing your best impression of a person who is completely unfazed, even as you double-check the door latch for the third time and move the holy water a little closer to your bed. The whole house smells like smoke and nervous bread. Your family gathers close to the hearth, every eye darting to the window at the smallest noise. Someone tells you to hush, because you wouldn't want to attract attention from, the wrong sort of visitor. This is a night of boundaries, between light and dark, the living and the dead, the known and whatever that was in the shadows. The church bells ring more often, each toll echoing across the fields in a desperate attempt to keep evil at bay. It's like every superstition you've ever heard suddenly applies, all at once. There's a rowan branch above the door, a bundle of garlic somewhere in the rafters, and your grandmother is muttering a charm under her breath, while pretending she's just humming. Everyone agrees. Better safe than spectre. It's not just fear, it's tradition. All Hallows Eve is a night when stories and reality mix together in a way that makes both more alarming. You grew up on tales of lost souls, wandering ancestors, and ancient things that slither between the worlds, waiting for just the right moment to borrow your soup. The older villagers remember the year the cows stopped giving milk after someone forgot to leave out a soul cake. No one wants a repeat of the Great Dairy Disaster of '67, not after what happened to old Bert and his haunted chicken. Outside, the night is thick and watchful. A neighbor shuffles by, head down, face hidden, carrying a loaf of bread and the look of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. You wonder, friend or ghost. The line is thin tonight. Every footstep in the street is a reminder that you're not alone. The animals sense it too. Even the meanest rooster has taken the night off. So here you are, a reluctant participant in the medieval spooktacular, clutching a mug of watery ale, listening to the wild wind, and pretending that the only thing you're worried about is running out of firewood. But you know, deep down, this is the night when anything can happen, when your ancestors visit, when mischief is expected, and when a little fear just might save your skin. Welcome to Halloween, medieval style. Now, try to relax if you can. There's nervous talk in every corner tonight, because it's not just a holiday, it's a crisis. You've heard it your whole life. Halloween is when the veil is thinnest. But what does that actually mean? In medieval times, it wasn't just a poetic phrase. People really believed that on this one night, the barrier between the world of the living and the land of the dead was, to put it bluntly, about as sturdy as a wet cheesecloth. If you thought your doors and windows did a bad job keeping out the cold, imagine how little they'd do against a determined ancestor with unresolved issues. All Hallows Eve isn't just a night, it's a portal. An invisible doorway swings open, and everything you thought was safely buried, both emotionally and literally, might just come shuffling back for a midnight snack. Some call it Samhain. Others simply call it the reason I keep a candle burning all night. Either way, it's the moment when your entire world feels haunted. If you've ever had the sense that your great-uncle Gerald is judging you for your life choices, just be glad he's not peeking in through the wattle and daub. Every tradition tonight is about managing that cosmic open house. The air is filled with the thick, anxious aroma of burning tallow, mashed turnips, and last-minute prayers. Your mother circles the house with salt, not just for seasoning, but to keep the spirits from tracking mud inside. Grandfather sits by the fire with a poker, not for warmth, but in case any ghost tries to borrow his favorite stool. You'd like to think it's silly, but then you remember the story of Aunt Magda's haunted loaf. Nobody risked unbuttered bread for a year after that one. Outside, the fields look different. The mist crawls along the ground, curling around the hedgerows like it's searching for an unlocked door. The moon peeks through the clouds, casting pale light that makes every familiar shape look suspicious. Even the trees seem to lean a little closer, their branches scratching at the walls with bony, root-like fingers. There's a reason nobody does laundry on Halloween. Everyone knows the spirits love to hide in damp sheets. If you spot a shadow flapping on the line, best just leave it for tomorrow. Or next week. This isn't just paranoia, it's folklore gone feral. Medieval people spent most nights worrying about wolves, thieves, and the distant sound of the Lord's tax collector. But on this night, the fear is more existential. The dead are coming for dinner, the old saying goes, and you'd better have enough bread and beer to go around. Some families set an extra place at the table, complete with a half-empty mug and the good spoon. It's the ultimate gesture of hospitality. Please, restless spirits, have a snack and move along. Nobody wants a hangry ghost. Of course, not all the visitors are friendly. There are tales, always told after sunset, about spirits with axes to grind, lost souls looking for lost coins, and mysterious figures that appear just as you're blowing out the last candle. Some people swear they've seen ghostly processions moving through the mist. Lines of pale, silent figures heading toward the churchyard. You're not sure if it's true, but you're also not about to look outside and check. So you wait. The house is as sealed as it's going to get. The bread is stale, the beer is weak, but the candles are bright, and your family is close. Every so often, you hear a tap at the window or a distant howl. Could be the wind, could be the neighbor's dog, or maybe, just maybe, the veil really is that thin. You clutch your blanket a little tighter, try to remember every charm your grandmother ever taught you, and promise, again, to leave an extra offering next year, because tonight, in the medieval world, the greatest threat isn't hunger, cold, or even your neighbor's questionable stew. It's the feeling that everything you can't see is suddenly just a little too close. The veil is thin, the world is strange, and the safest place is right where you are, surrounded by nervous family, half-lit shadows, and the stubborn hope that the sun will rise on a perfectly normal November. On most nights, your ancestors are safely tucked away in the churchyard, their bones enjoying a well-deserved rest and bothering exactly no one. But on Halloween, every medieval villager knows those dearly departed get a hall pass. And they're not here for small talk. They're here for food, attention, and a healthy dose of judgment. If you've ever felt watched while eating a midnight snack, imagine that feeling multiplied by every relative you've ever had. Tonight, it's not paranoia, it's tradition. The ancestor problem is less about ghosts rattling chains and more about your entire family tree rolling in for a surprise inspection. You're expected to welcome them back, whether you want to or not, because if you don't, there are consequences. Real, practical, turn your life upside down consequences. Maybe the butter won't churn. Maybe the bread goes stale. Maybe, worst of all, your beer tastes like someone whispered disappointment into it. In a world where every small disaster had a supernatural explanation, neglecting your ancestors was just asking for trouble. How do you keep them happy? With offerings, of course. Medieval people didn't wait until Christmas to give out snacks. On All Hallows Eve, you're making soul cakes. These aren't the fluffy pastries of modern bakeries. They're more like dense biscuits with a cross etched on top. You bake them by the dozen and leave them out on windowsills, doorsteps, and the special spirit shelf, which also doubles as a place to hide from chores. The cakes are supposed to keep the dead from feeling hangry, because everyone knows a well-fed ancestor is less likely to rearrange your furniture or spoil your next harvest. But the dead want more than food. They want to be remembered. This is a night for stories, whispered over the hearth as the wind shakes the shutters. Grandparents tell tales about old Uncle Egbert who once outwitted a tax collector with nothing but a turnip and a questionable accent. Kids are expected to listen and maybe pick up a few new strategies for their own tax avoidance plans. Names are spoken, blessings are shared, and somewhere, you hope, a restless ancestor gives a nod of approval and decides not to haunt your pantry. If you forget a name, though, or skip an offering because you're tired or you ate all the cakes yourself, no judgment, it's cold and stressful, you're rolling the dice. Medieval logic says the dead keep score, and next spring's cabbage crop might mysteriously fail, or you'll find your favorite shoes are always damp. Some families keep a list of names as long as their arms, just to be safe. It's a little like the world's oldest RSVP. Attend the feast or expect mild poltergeist activity. There's a social side to all this too. Your living neighbors notice if you're a little too stingy with the soul cakes, or if your house is suspiciously quiet on Halloween. People talk. Maybe you're cheap, maybe you're cursed, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. And medieval villages thrive on gossip the way modern cities thrive on takeout and passive-aggressive parking notes. The rumor mill grinds all night, fueled by flickering candlelight and a little too much ale. Even the church can't resist getting involved. The priests encourage prayers for the dead. And some churches offer special masses to ease the suffering of souls in purgatory. That's right. Even in death, there's paperwork. If you really want to impress your ancestors, drop a coin in the poor box or sponsor a bell ringing in their name. It's spiritual customer service with just a hint of bribery. By the end of the night, your house smells like burnt flour, your ears ring with stories, and your nerves are a little frayed. But if you've played your cards right, the ancestors are satisfied, your neighbors are impressed, and the only thing left to do is sweep up the crumbs before a ghostly uncle mistakes them for another offering. Sleep tight, because tomorrow you get to do it all again for All Saints' Day. With the living, the dead, and the eternally nosy. If you think picking a Halloween costume is stressful now, try doing it in the Middle Ages, when your options were limited to whatever was lying around the house, whatever hadn't been eaten by mice, and whatever didn't belong to someone who would chase you down for it. There were no party stores, no synthetic wigs, and certainly no polyester vampires. Medieval people made do with what they had, which usually meant disguises that were equal parts creative, terrifying, and, let's be honest, a little bit desperate. The idea behind dressing up wasn't just to look spooky or win a village costume contest, if only. The stakes were higher. People genuinely believed that, on All Hallows Eve, the veil between worlds was so thin that the dead, demons, fairies, and anything else lurking in the spiritual, lost and found could slip through. Costumes weren't about impressing your friends. They were about survival. If you looked just a little less like yourself, or at least less tasty, maybe the spirits would pass you by in favor of someone less prepared, like the neighbor who forgot his garlic wreath. So, what did you wear? First up, soot. Lots of soot. Smearing your face with fireplace ashes was the medieval equivalent of a Snapchat filter, only instead of adding cute dog ears, it made you look like you'd just barely survived a chimney sweep accident. It hid your features from evil spirits and, as a bonus, kept nosy neighbors from recognizing you as the one who borrowed their rake last spring and never gave it back. Next, animal skins if you could get your hands on them. A sheepskin draped over your AG's shoulders. Maybe a foxtail tied to your belt. Not only did it help you blend in with wandering ghosts, but it also made you look marginally tougher than you felt. If you were really lucky, or really committed, you'd grab a mask carved from wood or a hollowed-out turnip. Turnip masks were the medieval version of store-bought horror. Ugly, lumpy, and almost guaranteed to make a small child scream. If you carved it wrong, it might scare you too. For the fashion-forward, there was always the backwards clothes trick. Wearing your tunic inside out, or your cloak backwards, was thought to confuse not just the dead, but also any supernatural entity with a short attention span. Imagine a ghost pausing mid-haunt, scratching its translucent head, and drifting off to haunt someone whose socks actually matched. Flawless strategy. Children, meanwhile, had the least say in their costumes. Most ended up wrapped in whatever rags were left, bundled so tightly they resembled potatoes with legs. But this worked in their favor. Spirits reportedly had trouble haunting anyone who looked like a mobile laundry bundle. Parents, of course, claimed this was an ancient tradition. but it was probably just an excuse to get rid of the really scratchy blanket. Not everyone played along. There was always one person who declared costumes were a waste of good fabric. That person spent the evening being side-eyed by the entire village and, if local legend is to be believed, was the most likely to wake up with their shoes on the roof or a mysterious cold spot in their bed. Even medieval skeptics knew it wasn't wise to tempt fate on Halloween. As night deepened and the bonfires burned, the village became a moving parade of shadows, animal pelts, and lopsided turnip faces. The effect was less mysterious masquerade and more barnyard stampede meets bad laundry day, but nobody cared. If you managed to avoid recognition by both human and spirit, you'd done well. So, you huddle by the fire in your improvised disguise, one eye on the window, soot smudged on your nose, and your old boots on the wrong feet. You might not win any costume prizes, but you just might make it through the night without a single ghostly visitor. In the Middle Ages, that's what you call a success story. If you've ever felt the sting of waking up to find your house toilet papered by local teenagers, rest assured, medieval Halloween pranks were on another level. For the villagers of old, All Hallows Eve was open season for tricks, and the line between mischief and minor felony was delightfully blurry. But don't expect candy bars or chocolate coins. Treats in the medieval sense usually meant not having something stolen or set on fire. That's the real trick. It all starts with the basic bargain of Halloween. Hand over a treat or brace yourself for a trick. The treat, more often than not, was a soul cake, a dense, slightly sweet bun offered to visitors, both living and dead, who showed up at your door. Give generously, and you'd earn a blessing or at least avoid a hex. Stingy? Well, you might wake up with your livestock on the wrong side of the fence, or find your best cooking pot filled with mud and regret. The village children, egged on by stories and sugar-starved ambition, would form loose bands and roam from cottage to cottage, singing and rattling old bones. Their voices were not angelic. Think more cat in a rain barrel than church choir. Still, if you opened your door and handed over a cake or a stale hunk of bread, you'd be serenaded with blessings for your household and the souls of your dead. If you refused, if you closed the door, feigned sleep, or just didn't have enough snacks, then the fun began. Tricks came in every flavor, from the relatively harmless to the truly inventive. A favorite classic, hiding your firewood. There's nothing like the terror of waking up on November 1st to find that every log in your yard has migrated to the far side of the village. Bonus points if it was raining, snowing, or both. For those with access to turnips, the medieval pumpkin, it was common to carve hideous faces, stick a candle inside, and leave them on the doorstep of the grumpiest villager. Waking up to a flickering, angry vegetable was a sure sign you'd angered the local youth or a particularly creative sheep. Then there was livestock relocation, a tradition that required teamwork, strength, and a complete lack of adult supervision. The local cow or a particularly stubborn pig would mysteriously appear in someone else's garden, barn, or, in one legendary incident, the church itself. The best part? Nobody ever admitted to it. And by lunchtime, the entire village was involved in getting the animals home. Some called it community spirit. Others called it, please stop letting goats into the bakery. Adults weren't immune to the spirit of the night. After a few mugs of weak ale, even the town elders might be persuaded to join in the fun. Locks were swapped, carts were moved, and sometimes an outhouse was relocated by a group of cackling pranksters. The most ambitious even tried the old hang, the neighbor's laundry in the trees routine, a prank that could escalate into a multi-family feud lasting until spring. Of course, tricks weren't all fun and games. Sometimes, things went a little too far. Windows were broken, fences knocked down, or someone's prized turnip patch was mysteriously trampled. When this happened, the culprit was always the spirits, and the victim was expected to laugh it off or at least not start a real fight. Because, as everyone agreed, it was better than being haunted for the rest of the year. By midnight, the air buzzed with laughter, scolding, and the low hum of mischief well done. Even those on the receiving end of a trick had to admit, at least once a year, chaos brought everyone together, and so you drift to sleep, hoping your own door is clear, your goat is in its pen, and your firewood hasn't gone on holiday. In medieval Halloween, survival wasn't just about facing fears. It was about keeping your sense of humor. You'd think that after a long day of hard labor, muddy fields, and livestock-related disappointment, medieval villagers would be content to collapse into their straw beds. But not on Halloween. Tonight, after the sun has slunk away and the wind feels like it's plotting against your joints, everyone gathers in the open air for the medieval equivalent of crowdsourced home security, the bonfire. Because in a world where monsters could be real and shadows held grudges, one candle just wasn't enough. It starts as a slow migration. Families shuffle out of their drafty huts, arms loaded with whatever will burn: logs, dried brush, old furniture, and sometimes, suspiciously, the remains of a failed woodworking project. Kids trail behind, half dragging bundles of twigs and hoping to impress the adults by not immediately setting their tunics on fire. The bravest elders poke at the pile, argue about the best way to stack logs, and lecture everyone about the proper way to start a fire, which always seems to involve more spit and opinions than matches. When the bonfire finally roars to life, it becomes a living thing. Sparks crackle skyward, the night air smells of smoke, damp wool, and the faintest whiff of roasted turnip. The flames push back the darkness in a wide, golden circle, just far enough to let everyone pretend the shadows aren't full of hungry ghosts and disappointed ancestors. Children circle the fire, faces lit with orange glow and wild excitement. Parents hover near the edge, half watching their kids, half listening for the telltale sounds of mischief or spectral invasion. But the bonfire isn't just about warmth. It's about safety, ritual, and sending a very unsubtle message to anything lurking in the night. Not today, spirits, not today. Medieval people believed that fire kept away evil. The bigger the bonfire, the less likely it was that something uninvited would wander in and ruin the harvest, the livestock, or the good tablecloth. This was fire as protection, as magic, and as the best insurance policy before the age of Allstate. Of course, nothing brings people together like the promise of not being eaten by a ghost. Neighbors who spent the week arguing over stolen geese now stand shoulder to shoulder, passing mugs of weak ale, exchanging stories, and daring each other to leap over the flames for luck. This is where new village legends are born. Who jumped the highest, who tripped, and who singed their pants enough to provide gossip until spring. Rituals around the fire vary by region. Some throw in handfuls of grain for a good harvest. Others toss in little carvings or scraps of cloth to represent old grievances, in hopes the flames will burn away bad luck. A few brave souls whisper wishes into the smoke, asking for health, love, or just an extra egg at breakfast. And somewhere in the chaos, someone will inevitably attempt to roast a root vegetable. The result is always disappointing, but it's tradition. There's music, of course. Someone brings a battered drum or a homemade flute. People sing songs that are half prayer, half ward against the things in the dark. Occasionally, an enterprising child tries to start a ghost story, but is swiftly shushed by every adult within earshot. This is a night to honor fear, not court it. Better to sing loudly, and pretend you're not secretly keeping one eye on the shadows just beyond the firelight. By the time the bonfire burns low, the entire village smells like smoke, sweat, and low-grade adrenaline. But the fire has worked its magic. The cold is held at bay, the spirits have hopefully moved on, and even the most stubborn night terrors have been replaced by the cozy exhaustion of communal survival. As you trudge home, hair full of ashes and heart a little lighter, you know you've made it through another Halloween. At least until next year, when the bonfire calls you back to the circle, and the darkness waits, just out of reach. If you think your neighborhood gets noisy on Halloween, you've never experienced a medieval village determined to outshout the undead. The sun is down, the bonfire is blazing, and somewhere in the distance, a bell starts to toll. Loud, insistent, and very much on the please don't haunt me side of the musical spectrum. Because on All Hallows Eve, when superstition reigns supreme, medieval people turn up the volume, and the church bell becomes both alarm system and public service announcement. It starts with a low, resonant clang from the church tower, echoing over rooftops and fields. The sound is oddly comforting. Unless you're a spirit, then it's just bad news. Bells are rung all night long, sometimes with such enthusiasm that the local priest needs to ice his wrists afterward. Medieval wisdom says the noise drives away ghosts, witches, and anything else that might mistake your village for an all-you-can-possess buffet. Inside the church, the scene is even more dramatic. Candles flicker in every corner, illuminating stone walls and the anxious faces of villagers who definitely would rather be home, but aren't taking any chances. The air is thick with incense, the kind that smells vaguely of hope and old shoes. The priest leads the congregation in a marathon of Latin chants. Most people don't know what they're saying, but that's part of the charm. After all, nothing says spiritual protection like shouting phonetically and hoping for the best. If you're not Catholic or you skipped a few masses, good luck keeping up. The rhythm is relentless. Prayers for the dead, for the living, and for whoever carved the terrifying turnip lantern. Sitting in the aisle, children fidget, grandmothers mutter, and the local cantor sings just slightly off-key, adding to the general air of better safe than sorry. The choir gives it their all, even if all sounds like a herd of geese trying to harmonize. Nobody dares laugh. Everyone knows that spirits hate a well-timed snicker. Between chants, the priest delivers dire warnings about wandering souls and the importance of being, above all, very, very pious tonight. There are sermons about saints, the afterlife, and a suspiciously high number of references to last year's unexplained cheese shortage. Coincidence? The villagers think not. The message is clear. If you want to avoid supernatural retribution, stick close to the church, sing loud, and above all, donate generously to the candle fund. While all this is happening, the church bell never quite stops. Parish boys take turns pulling the rope, occasionally racing each other for the chance to ring out their fears, boredom, and, if we're honest, a little pent-up mischief. The ringing becomes a kind of medieval white noise. Soothing. If you're on the right side of the grave. Some people even claim to hear odd harmonics, as if the bells are speaking directly to the spirits, or at least negotiating for an uneventful night. But not everyone stays inside. Some villagers prefer to circle the churchyard, reciting prayers or singing snatches of hymn, anything to make sure their voices are heard above the wind, the wolves, and that one guy who always insists on improvising the liturgy. It's part tradition, part peer pressure, and part genuine terror. You join in. Because even if your Latin is rusty and your singing voice is best described as optimistic, you'd rather risk embarrassment than supernatural payback. By midnight, the air around the church is vibrating with sound, smoke, and nervous energy. The bell's echo mingles with snatches of chant, drifting over the fields and off into the darkness, where it, hopefully, persuades every ghost and goblin to try the next village over. You head home, ears ringing, throat scratchy, but oddly comforted. In the world of medieval Halloween, the louder the noise, the safer you sleep. And tonight, nobody's risking silence. If you think Halloween is all about fun-sized candy bars and leftover peanut butter cups, try living in a world where the main treat is a slightly sweet, slightly sad little cake that serves as both dessert and spiritual bribe. Welcome to the era of soul cakes, a culinary tradition that's part hospitality, part insurance policy, and entirely carbohydrate-based. The concept is simple, if mildly terrifying. On All Hallows Eve, hungry ghosts roam the land, looking for snacks, and, more importantly, signs that they're remembered. If you leave out a soul cake, a round, dense, spiced bun with a cross scratched on top, the spirits might pass your house by, blessing your family and moving on. Forget, and you risk a season's worth of supernatural sabotage, soured milk, missing chickens, and that cold, creeping feeling every time you reach for the bread box. Soul cakes aren't just for the dead. The living, especially children, the poor, and any itinerant minstrels with a keen sense of timing also go door to door, singing for their supper. Their songs are half plea, half threat. A soul cake. A soul cake. Please, good mistress. A soul cake. The unspoken subtext. Feed me, or next year your cabbages may not survive the frost. This is medieval DoorDash, but instead of tipping with cash, you pay in baked goods and hope your neighbor's kids don't hold grudges. Baking begins days in advance. Every household with flour, a pinch of spice, and the luxury of an oven, or a moderately hot rock, joins in. The air fills with the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and something faintly desperate. Mothers shoo children away from the cooling cakes, knowing that even the dead don't like to be shortchanged. Some recipes are family secrets, handed down from ancestors who probably invented them as an excuse to keep all the good butter for themselves. The cakes themselves are sturdy, not the sort of thing you eat in a hurry, unless you have very strong teeth. You make a cross on top with a knife, not just for piety, but because even ghosts appreciate branding. Some add currants if they're feeling fancy, but most stick to the basics. Flour, eggs, sugar if you can get it, and a prayer that the local miller hasn't stretched the grain with sawdust this year. When dusk falls, the parade begins. Kids in ragged disguises, soot-smeared faces, and occasionally an accidental turnip helmet roam from house to house, singing and begging for soul cakes. Adults pretend not to see them until the third round of God Bless. The master of this house makes it clear they won't leave. Each cake handed over is a little insurance. One more layer of protection between your family and next week's mysterious crop blight. Not everyone participates with equal enthusiasm. There's always a neighbor who forgot to bake or claims he's fasting for spiritual reasons. But everyone remembers whose door went unvisited by soul cake singers. That person is in for a year of drafty windows, suspiciously moody cows, and a reputation for being about as much fun as a damp sack of straw. The religious angle is never far away. The church teaches that every soul cake shared is a prayer for the dead, a way to shorten a loved one's time in purgatory, and, just maybe, score some extra points with the local priest. The poor, the desperate, and the opportunistically hungry all line up to receive their cakes, muttering blessings and crossing themselves, just in case. By midnight, the last crumbs have vanished, the songs fade, and the village streets fall quiet. Maybe, just maybe, you've appeased the hungry spirits, cheered the local orphans, and avoided a year's worth of bad luck. You crawl into bed, the taste of nutmeg still on your tongue, and pray your soul cake offering was enough to keep the ghosts and your neighbors from coming back for seconds. Step outside on a medieval Halloween, and you're instantly swallowed by a thick, rolling mist that clings to every stone, rafter, and sheep, like a guilty conscience. The day was grey enough already, but now, as darkness falls, the entire village seems to dissolve into a haunted watercolor, shapes shifting, sounds muffled, and every shadow threatening to sprout legs. You'd think fog was just weather, but tonight it's practically a main character. It's hard to say what's out there. You squint across the yard, where the boundary between your garden and the unknown is marked by a single, shivering turnip lantern. Is that a pile of firewood? Or has old Nan's infamous ghost dog finally returned to settle accounts? Even the bravest adults keep to the footpaths, avoiding the soft, silent reaches of the commons. Children cling to sleeves and huddle together, wide-eyed, certain the mist is hiding something. If not a wandering ancestor, then at least a neighbor's chicken possessed by last year's restless soul. Sounds become untrustworthy. The distant creak of a cart might be the wind, or it might be something dragging itself up from the churchyard. The snort of a cow is somehow both reassuring and, tonight, a little sinister. Every owl hoot is suspicious. Every distant bark might be a warning. You catch a flash of movement. Was that a real person, or just a memory? Your own footsteps seem to echo too loudly, and for a split second, you wish you'd stayed inside with your mug of weak ale and the family goat. The mist has a way of turning the world unfamiliar. Fences disappear, trees looming larger and stranger than they ever did in daylight. It's the perfect cover for everything you hope isn't real. Ghosts, fairies, wandering monks looking to collect last year's tithes. Medieval villagers tell tales of seeing whole processions of the dead gliding through the fog, pale and silent, heading for the church or the nearest barn with unfinished business. Some say they've spotted will-o'-the-wisps, ghostly blue lights bobbing along the marshes, tempting anyone foolish enough to follow into the bog, never to return. As warnings go, don't follow strange lights into the swamp is up there with don't eat anything you can't pronounce. Superstition thrives in this kind of weather. Grandparents insist on closing every shutter tight and stuffing cracks with straw, so the mist can't slip in and steal your breath. Rowan branches and sprigs of sage are hung above the doors. Even the skeptical put a pinch of salt on the windowsill. The village wise woman is suddenly very popular, her pockets bulging with coins and desperate hopes as she doles out advice. Stay inside, keep the fire burning, don't look back if you hear your name whispered from the dark. Meanwhile, the local pranksters are having the time of their lives. Nothing enhances a good Halloween trick like an extra thick fog. Someone's moved the well bucket again. The neighbor's cart now faces the wrong direction. If you stumble into a patch of mud and lose a shoe, you'll swear it was the work of spirits, not the smirking teenager who's been waiting for this all week. You hurry home, heart racing, every step accompanied by the silent, creeping question, what's actually out there? Is it ghosts? Is it tricksters? Or is it just your own imagination? Fattened on too many fireside tales and a year's worth of nervous anticipation, you latch the door, stoke the fire, and try not to think about what the mist might be hiding. Because tonight, you're not taking any chances. Let the fog have the lanes, the commons, and anyone foolish enough to wander. You've got soul cakes, warm feet, and just enough sense to know some mysteries are better left unsolved, at least until sunrise. You'd think with all this talk of ghosts, ghouls, and dead relatives paying late-night visits, the church might want to take back Halloween entirely. And you'd be right, sort of. For medieval villagers, the calendar was less a neat progression of days and more a confetti cannon of saints' feast days, holy obligations, and vaguely threatening reminders from the local priest that eternal damnation is just a sin away. And at the heart of this season sits a peculiar dilemma. How do you honor both the official saints and the unofficial spirits without accidentally offending one or accidentally summoning the other? All Hallows Eve is, officially, the pre-game for All Saints' Day. A high church holiday packed with processions, bells, and so much Latin chanting that your ears ring for a week. The priests insist this is a time to honor the saints, those holy VIPs who, according to legend, performed miracles, healed the sick, or at least managed not to get excommunicated. You're expected to attend Mass, light a candle, and recite prayers for the souls in purgatory, all while not looking too excited about the leftover soul cakes at breakfast. But here's the catch. While the saints are up on their pedestals, sometimes literally, relic displays, most villagers are hedging their bets. They attend Mass, yes. They bow and scrape. They mutter the right prayers. But when night falls, those same people are tossing extra grain on the bonfire, hanging charms above the door, and making sure last year's ghost knows it's still welcome for supper. After all, saints are good for miracles. But Uncle Bartholomew is the one who actually knows where you lost your lucky shoe. It's not just a matter of superstition. It's insurance. Miracles are famously unpredictable. Saint Agnes may have stopped a flood, but did she ever find your missing goat? Did Saint Cuthbert actually cure your mother-in-law's rash? Or was it just that new ointment from the wise woman? In a world where every crop failure or sudden illness might be divine punishment, people cast a wide net for protection. Why put all your eggs in one holy basket, especially when the spirits of your ancestors have proven they're not above a little supernatural sabotage? The saints themselves are something of a mixed bag. Some are local legends, their stories embroidered by generations of enthusiastic storytellers. Others are so obscure you're not entirely sure if they ever existed, or if they're just a fancy name for someone who once donated a lot of sheep to the monastery. Feast days blur together in a haze of fasting, feasting, and a lot of standing around waiting for the priest to finish the longest sermon of the year. You keep a mental list. Saint Crispin for shoes, Saint Blaise for throats, Saint Anthony for lost keys, or goats, and Saint Expedite for everything you forgot until the last minute. It's like an ancient, slightly judgy customer service hotline. Of course, the church keeps trying to discourage pagan practices, but traditions die hard, especially when those traditions involve food, fire, or a mild chance to gossip. Most families keep up both sets of rituals: prayers for the saints, offerings for the spirits, and an occasional bribe for the local priest to look the other way. It's all about balance. Nobody wants to risk offending a miracle worker, but you really don't want to upset Granny's ghost either. So, on this night of uneasy compromise, you light your candle for the saints, you bake your soul cakes for the ancestors, and you hope that, come morning, both heaven and the hereafter are satisfied. After all, in medieval life, you need all the help you can get. Saints, spirits, or otherwise. And if the miracles don't come through, well, there's always next year's bonfire to try again. If you thought your grandmother's tips for keeping away bad luck were a little eccentric, never put shoes on the table, salt at every door, and don't whistle at night, just wait until you get a load of medieval Halloween. Tonight, every superstition your village has ever whispered comes out to play, and if you don't have at least 5 charms hanging above your bed, well, good luck sleeping. Theplay.com to mine. Dead aren't the only thing roaming. Anxiety is too. First, you need to prep your house. That means sweeping out the hearth, because everyone knows ghosts love leftover ashes, scattering salt across the threshold. Salt stops everything, apparently, and hanging bundles of dried herbs, rosemary, sage, rowan, and a bit of anything else you can forage, over the doors and windows. Bonus points for juniper or nettle, which allegedly chase away ill winds and distant cousins who owe you money. Next comes the serious business of blocking out evil. Every household has its own recipe for a protection charm. Some families prefer a tiny pouch sewn shut and stuffed with breadcrumbs, iron filings, and a lucky chicken feather. Others stick to the classic horseshoe nailed above the doorway, open side up so the luck doesn't spill out. If you're fancy, or just desperate, you might draw protective runes in chalk around your bed, which is great until the dog walks through them and tracks supernatural insurance all over the floor. Candles are critical, not just for lighting up the gloom, but because flame supposedly keeps away wandering souls and, as a side benefit, makes it harder for anything with claws to sneak up on you. Some say the bigger the candle, the safer you'll be, so tonight's the night to break out that weird lumpy one you found in the root cellar last spring. Light it, recite a half-remembered blessing, and try not to notice that it smells like turnips and desperation. Let's talk about water. Everyone knows the spirits can't cross running water, so a bucket by the door is a must. Got a stream nearby? Double points. And don't forget to keep a cup of water by your bed, just in case a thirsty ghost gets parched mid-haunt. You wouldn't want them hanging around out of spite. The family wise woman, or, failing that, the neighbor with the most opinions, has a ready supply of last-minute advice. Sleep with your head to the east, never sleep with your feet facing the door, and under no circumstances let a cat sleep on your chest. It'll steal your breath, she warns, as the family cat glares, plotting your downfall. If something goes bump in the night, everyone knows the best plan is to pretend you're asleep and hope it's just Uncle Jeff coming home late again. And if you really feel you've attracted unwanted attention from the other side, it's time for a DIY exorcism. This usually involves more shouting than science. Stand in the center of your hut, brandish your broom, and yell every sacred word you know. No matter if it's a prayer, a bit of song, or just the bread recipe shouted with conviction. If the chickens join in, all the better. For extreme cases, some families simply abandon the house for the night and sleep in the barn. Let the spirits have the bed. They shrug. Maybe they'll change the sheets. Of course, half the fun is seeing whose superstitions work best. The next morning, everyone compares notes. Who slept through the night? Whose goat acted weird? Who found muddy footprints by the hearth? In the medieval world, superstition is survival, and a handy excuse when you can't find your socks. So you tuck yourself in, herbs at the ready, salt on the floor, and hope that tonight the only thing haunting you is the memory of that time you put your shoes on the table. Welcome to medieval Halloween, where the most terrifying thing in your house isn't necessarily the ghost. It's the fact that the only light source you own is a half-melted, lopsided candle with a wick that gives up at the slightest breeze. Forget electricity. In your medieval home, every flicker of flame is both a comfort and a threat, and every shadow cast on the wall is another reason to question your life choices. Candles are precious. Most are made from tallow, animal fat that smells like regret and smokes like an overworked blacksmith. If you're lucky and wealthy, you might have a beeswax candle, the kind that actually smells pleasant and doesn't immediately fill the room with enough soot to paint a mural. But for everyone else, it's lumpy tallow, drippy stubs, and a prayer that you don't run out before sunrise. On Halloween, you light every candle you can find, because everyone knows that darkness is when the real trouble starts. The effect is eerie. The room glows with a wavering golden light. But for every corner illuminated, two more are plunged into deeper shadow. The walls seem to crawl, shapes flickering and dancing in the periphery of your vision. Is that just the pattern of the plaster? Or is something moving? The wind rattles the window shutters, and the flame bends, throwing your own face into monstrous relief. You remind yourself, firmly, that ghosts hate light, but shadows love it, and tonight they multiply like rabbits at a carrot convention. Keeping candles lit is a full-time job. The house is drafty, air conditioning, medieval style, and every gust threatens to snuff out your one source of safety. You shuffle around, relighting wicks, burning your fingers, and muttering words that would earn you an extra session in the confessional. Every family has their own candle superstition. Some say if the flame burns blue, a spirit is near. Others insist a sputtering wick means an unwelcome visitor is already in the room. Tonight, even the skeptics are watching for wax drips shaped like skulls or crosses. Of course, there's a price for all this extra illumination. Candles aren't cheap, and everyone you burn is a chunk out of next week's food budget. The real tragedy? Accidental arson. It's the medieval home insurance nightmare. A toppled candle, a dry straw floor, and suddenly the scariest thing in the room is the thought of explaining to your lord why you need a new roof and maybe a new family goat. Parents keep a hawk's eye on children and pets, both of whom have a knack for knocking over candlesticks and then pretending to be surprised when the curtains start smouldering. The village has a fire bucket, but nobody can ever find it when they need it. Instead, everyone keeps an ear out for the telltale crackle that means Halloween has turned into Community Bucket Brigade night. But there's magic too. In the soft, quivering light, families huddle close, sharing stories, nervously laughing at each new draft that makes the flame dance. Children stare wide-eyed at the mysterious patterns on the walls, imagining heroic saints or mischievous sprites in the shifting glow. Grandparents claim to see old friends, lost pets, or ancestors. Whether out of sentiment or because they need new spectacles, nobody's sure. So you sit in the flicker, half comforted, half on edge, and hope your candle lasts until dawn. Maybe you'll keep one burning in the window to guide lost souls. Maybe you'll count your blessings every time the wax sizzles instead of your furniture. And if the flame gutters low and the shadows creep close, just remember, you're not alone. Your entire village is doing the same dance, fighting the same darkness, clinging to the same small, stubborn light. Welcome to the candle problem. Part warmth, part worry, all medieval. You might think that after a night of bonfires, bells, and kids singing for soul cakes, silence would be a blessing. But on medieval Halloween, silence was the worst sound of all. In a world where everyday life is filled with clatter, livestock, bickering neighbors, and the background soundtrack of Who Just Stole My Rake, a sudden hush was enough to make your skin prickle. The quiet didn't just settle over the village. It pressed in, thick and uneasy, like a wool blanket left out in the rain. Tonight, after the last song fades and the fire dies down, the village is wrapped in an unnatural stillness. The wind drops, the dogs curl up tight, and even the chickens stop their midnight squabbling. You sit by your smouldering hearth, counting the cracks in the wall and straining your brass-blacks ears for any hint of life outside. Each tick of quiet feels less like peace and more like a warning. In medieval logic, nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the supernatural. If the world is quiet, it's because something's out there, and it wants you to notice. Every story you've ever been told about Halloween starts to bubble up. The old tales say that silence is the sign. The dead are close. If you can't hear the usual night noises, no crickets, no distant sheep, not even the neighbor's baby howling, it means the spirits are moving. Some families call this the death hush. Grandparents claim they can feel it in their bones. the same way they predict rain or know when their cousin is about to show up unannounced. Silence is a messenger, and it never brings good news. Children notice first. They fidget, whisper, and shoot nervous glances at the door. "Where's the owl?" someone asks. "Why isn't the wind howling?" You shush them, but the question sticks. Why is it so quiet? The air feels charged, as if the whole world is holding its breath. Shadows grow long in the corners, and you swear you just saw something move by the window. A trick of the light, you hope. Or maybe just a reflection of your own nerves. In a desperate bid to break the tension, someone coughs. Someone else pokes at the fire, hoping for a friendly crackle. You clear your throat and hum a tune. Badly. But the silence rushes right back in as soon as you stop. Even the family cat, usually so eager to knock things over, sits perfectly still, eyes fixed on a spot you can't see. Is it just your imagination, or is the room getting colder? That's when the mind games begin. Every house has a story about the time someone vanished on a silent Halloween. The wise woman says she once heard footsteps in the quiet, soft, and careful just outside her door. The baker claims he saw lights bobbing on the road, moving too smoothly to be lanterns. Never trust a silent night, the priest warns. Pray a little, louder, just in case. Of course, not everyone believes the tales. The local skeptic insists silence is just the sound of everyone finally asleep. But nobody listens to him, especially not tonight. Instead, families huddle closer, lighting another candle, muttering another prayer, or at least pretending to find something very important at the bottom of the soup pot. If you're brave, you might slip outside and stand on the stoop, listening to the vast, heavy quiet. The mist hangs low, the moon peeks out, and the whole world seems to wait. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hear a whisper, a distant footfall, or the soft sigh of someone, or something, moving through the night. Or maybe you'll just hurry back inside, bolt the door, and tell yourself it's nothing. Because on Halloween, in the medieval village, silence isn't golden. It's the sound of the veil, thinner than ever, waiting to be crossed. You've survived tricks, mist, bonfires, and the ominous hush that means something's probably lurking. Now comes the part of Halloween that every medieval homeowner dreads. Prepping your hovel for maximum spectral security. Because if you think modern home protection is stressful, try doing it with nothing but a handful of superstitions, half a candle, and the strong suspicion that your front door is mostly decorative. Step 1. Fortify the entryways. Medieval doors don't have deadbolts or even reliable hinges. Instead, you wedge a thick stick under the handle, prop up a bench, and hope you'll keep out. Spirit's sign written in mud has the desired effect. It's not just the front door either. Every window, all 1.5 of them, gets the same treatment. Shutters are barred with whatever's heavy and not currently being used as a pillow. Step 2. Sweep, sweep, sweep. It's a widely accepted belief that ghosts hate a tidy house. Or maybe they just trip on loose straw, no one's quite sure. Tonight, every inch of the floor gets a frantic once-over with the family broom, and you pause to flick suspicious dust motes out the door. For extra luck, sweep toward the exit. As everyone knows, this ushers the bad spirits right back outside, preferably into your least favorite neighbor's yard. Step 3. The charm offensive. Above each doorway, you hang something protective: rowan branches, iron nails, a blessed horseshoe, or a bundle of dried sage tied with string that's been blessed, or at least not used for anything too unholy. If you're extra cautious, you add a bit of garlic. Not because you're expecting vampires, wrong holiday, but medieval logic doesn't discriminate. But because garlic is expensive and showing it off tells the spirits you mean business. Step 4. The family circle. The safest way to sleep tonight? Everyone gathers in the main room, curled up under the single good blanket, facing outward like a flock of sheep with trust issues. Grandparents claim this confuses wandering ghosts. They can't decide who to haunt if you're all making eye contact. For added protection, you might mark a rough circle on the floor with chalk, flour, or the last of the precious salt, muttering prayers with every shaky line. Yes, you'll have to explain the mess tomorrow, but tonight, it's worth it. Step 5. Set a trap for trouble. Some families leave out a bowl of water, a crust of bread, or a soul cake near the hearth. This is less an offering and more a distraction, like leaving a snack for a burglar so they forget to steal the good stuff. You hope the ghosts are easily pleased, and if not, at least they'll be too busy judging your baking to bother the livestock. Finally, it's time to distract yourself. Someone tells a story, someone else sings, and everyone pretends not to notice the shadows stretching along the walls. You check the charms one last time, whisper a hasty prayer, and throw another log on the fire, even if it's technically the last of next winter's supply. Safety first, warmth second, long-term planning a distant third. And when you finally settle down, surrounded by family, garlic, and a truly impressive amount of broom straw, you try not to think about the draft seeping under the door or the way the candle flickers every time someone mentions the thin place. Maybe, if you're lucky, the only spirits visiting tonight will be the kind that leave you alone. Or, at most, borrow a soul cake and slip quietly back to wherever they came from. Ghost-proofing a medieval hovel is mostly about hope, habit, and making enough noise to scare away your own anxiety. Still, as you drift towards sleep in your circle of chaos and protection, you can almost believe you've outsmarted the night. Almost. You might think death finally puts an end to family drama, neighbor feuds, and community rumors. Not in medieval Europe. Here, dying just gives you a bigger audience. The afterlife is less eternal rest and more never-ending village meeting. And Halloween is the night when all that unfinished business floats back into your life with the subtlety of a cow in a church aisle. It's a known fact, at least according to every nervous grandmother, that the dead love to gossip. Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's a cosmic hobby, or maybe purgatory is just one big open-plan office with terrible coffee and infinite time for judgment. Either way, you don't just fear the dead haunting your dreams. You fear them reporting back to everyone you've ever offended, left unpaid, or underfed at last year's harvest feast. So, on Halloween, you tread carefully. Every word spoken is chosen with the kind of diplomatic skill that would impress a modern PR firm. Grandparents urge the family to speak well of the departed, not out of respect, but because no one wants the spectral equivalent of an angry Yelp review. Every awkward incident, the bread you burned, the fence you didn't fix, the time you accidentally kept the neighbor's goat an extra week, might be aired at the annual Undead reunion. Offerings help, but there's no guarantee. Maybe you left out soul cakes and a bowl of ale for Great Aunt Marjorie. But if you forgot to mention her prize turnips during the family prayer, she's likely to come back with notes. Villagers swap horror stories of ancestors returning with a list of grievances. Your laundry's still a disgrace. Your son never visits my grave. Did you really let the chickens inside again? It's the medieval version of being subtweeted by your entire ancestry. And the dead don't keep their opinions to themselves. If the cows dry up, it's because someone insulted Grandpa's memory. If the well runs low, must be a dead cousin getting even. Bad luck is always suspiciously specific, as though the afterlife is full of vengeful auditors who specialize in petty revenge. Villagers claim you can hear the gossip if you listen carefully. Rustling in the trees, whispers in the wind, or that strange moment when the bread refuses to rise. "It's your Uncle Walter," the wise woman warns. "He always did hate your baking." Worse still, the dead don't just gossip about the living, they gossip about each other. Spirits are rumored to hold their own feasts, complete with ranking who got the best funeral, whose memorial bread was actually edible, and who's been haunting the same house for centuries out of sheer spite. Somewhere out there, your ancestors are comparing notes on your latest choices. And the only thing scarier than a vengeful ghost is a disappointed one. Of course, this all leads to an arms race of courtesy. Everyone suddenly remembers to light an extra candle for the dearly departed, mention every ancestor by name, and recite blessings with the enthusiasm of someone who just realized the family ghosts might be eavesdropping. If you're especially worried, you drop by the priest for a little spiritual PR management. A well-timed mass or an extra coin in the poor box can't hurt. It's the medieval equivalent of damage control, just in case last year's gossip reached heaven. So tonight, as you tuck yourself under your blanket, you try to remember every old grudge, every forgotten promise, every ancestor who ever had an opinion. You say a few extra nice words, leave out an extra treat, and hope that when the dead come whispering, the worst they'll say is, "Well, at least he tried." Because in medieval Europe, the only thing more powerful than death is a really good story, and you never know who's listening on the other side. If you thought medieval Halloween was just about spooky stories and candlelit paranoia, you're forgetting the soundscape, the medieval playlist you didn't ask for. Tonight, sleep isn't just lost to nerves or candlelight, but to the endless chorus of things that go bump, howl, or, in the case of your neighbor Carl, triple A che. At 2 in the morning, it begins with the owls. They are the official night shift, perched on every beam and belfry, hooting with a wisdom that feels just a bit judgmental. Medieval folks believed owls were more than just birds. They were omens, messengers, or the occasional reincarnated relative. Every hoo-hoo from the rafters sends shivers down your spine. Is it Aunt Edna checking in, or just another feathered busybody? You'll never know. The only certainty, silence means something worse. Next come the wolves. Far from the distant nature soundtracks of modern sleep apps, these are real, live, unapologetic predators. Their howls echo through the village, rising over the fields and crawling under doors. It's not just atmospheric. It's a living reminder that, yes, something out there still sees you as a snack. For children, it's the soundtrack of nightmares. For adults, it's background music for checking the livestock one more time and then pretending you weren't scared. Dogs, naturally, join in, barking at shadows, at wolves, or just at the general anxiety of the night. Some are loyal guardians. Others are convinced every passing gust of wind is the beginning of the apocalypse. Either way, you'll be listening to a canine chorus well into the wee hours. If you were hoping for peace and quiet, medieval Halloween has other plans. Not to be outdone, there's the local wildlife. Foxes yelp, mice skitter, and the occasional goat decides that tonight is the perfect time to express its existential dread. All those little sounds, the rustle in the straw, the patter of small feet on the roof, the mysterious clanking near the tool shed, combine to make the darkness feel alive, as if the entire countryside is holding its own midnight festival. And then there's Carl. Every village has one. Someone who takes Halloween just a little too seriously, or maybe just got into the cider early. Carl is convinced he can scare away evil with sheer volume. So he shrieks, cackles, or recites long-winded ghost stories from his window at top volume. The wolves pause, the owls pause. Even the spirits probably pause to wonder what exactly is wrong with Carl. All these sounds mix together, overlapping and echoing off the cold stone and muddy lanes. Sometimes they blend into white noise. Other times, one stray howl or yelp cuts straight through the calm, setting hearts racing. The fire pops, someone in the next room sneezes, and for a moment, you wonder if that sigh was just the wind or something older, quieter, and much, much closer. Eventually, you surrender to the soundscape. Maybe you even find it comforting. The constant reminder that you're not alone, that the living, the dead, and Carl are all out there, making noise just to keep the darkness honest. You pull the blanket over your ears, listen to the chorus, and hope that tomorrow the loudest thing you hear is the morning bell and not another midnight confession from Carl. On medieval Halloween, the soundtrack never really ends. It just gets weirder as the night goes on. In every medieval village, Halloween isn't just a night for ghosts and ancestors. It's prime time for everyone's favorite pastime, witch hunting. You'd think with all the genuine supernatural drama going on, folks might take a break from blaming the neighbor with the unusual herb garden. But no, All Hallows Eve is the high season for suspicion, accusations, and the annual search for someone, anyone to blame, for everything from spoiled beer to that weird rash nobody wants to talk about. Witch worries begin long before sunset. Did your bread fail to rise? Was your cow acting odd? Did your child catch a cold? Congratulations, you have a mystery. And now it's time to find a culprit. The suspect list is short. The midwife, the woman who talks to cats, the old man who brews odd, smelling teas, or anyone who happens to look a bit too comfortable with spiders. If you've ever said bless you at the wrong moment, you might want to lay low tonight. Halloween superstition turbocharges all these suspicions. The thin veil between worlds makes people edgy, jumpy, and extremely interested in their neighbor's business. People swap stories about curses, charms, and the infamous case of the haunted butter churn. I'm telling you, Agnes. She looked at my cow and 3 days later, dry as a bone. The logic is flawless. After all, why blame the weather or your own poor animal husbandry when a perfectly good scapegoat is available? The accused, if they're smart, stay indoors with every window shuttered and every charm hanging in the doorway. Some villages even have a witch check, a series of increasingly ridiculous tests designed to root out evil. Does she float in water? Is her hair suspiciously frizzy? Can she recite the Lord's Prayer without stuttering? Forget actual magic. Tonight, your best defense is being completely unremarkable and slightly forgettable. Children, of course, love the drama. They invent elaborate backstories for every witch in town, convinced the local widow can turn invisible or that the shepherd's odd uncle once made a goat talk. The bravest dare each other to sneak past the witch's house, certain that even a glance from her window will make their ears fall off. Adults pretend to scoff, but everyone secretly tucks an extra sprig of rosemary in their coat, or mumbles a blessing as they pass by. The church, ever eager to keep things from getting out of hand, and sometimes failing spectacularly, tries to steer the evening toward piety and away from pitchforks. Priests remind the flock that true evil is a spiritual battle, not a neighborhood hobby. Still, by morning, there's usually at least one broken fence, one missing chicken, and a neighbor who's been side-eyed into hiding for a week. For the accused, Halloween is a masterclass in not standing out. You smile politely, say little, and definitely don't hand out any experimental pies. You hope the night passes without incident, that the only thing flying is bats, and that tomorrow the village will find a new crisis to fixate on. Maybe the mysterious case of who keeps moving the firewood, and so the witch worries pass with the night. By sunrise, the spell is broken. People remember they actually like Agnes's butter. The midwife's tea cures more headaches than it causes. And the world is still spinning, just as full of odd neighbors as before. But next year, when the shadows grow long and the bread goes flat, the witch hunt will start all over again. Because in medieval life, the real magic isn't casting spells, it's surviving your neighbor's suspicion. Halloween isn't just for hiding from ghosts or worrying about witch accusations. It's also the one night a year when the future is, allegedly, up for grabs. For medieval villagers, All Hallows Eve is the perfect opportunity to dabble in a little harmless fortune-telling, at least until someone sets the hay on fire or accidentally summons their cousin's ghost. If you're a young and marriageable person, tonight is your best shot at figuring out who you'll marry, how rich you'll be, or if you're destined to live alone with nothing but a cranky goat and an impressive collection of potato sacks. Divination is a group activity, especially for young women. As soon as the elders aren't looking, or are too distracted by keeping the candles from burning the house down, out come the nuts, mirrors, and apples. The games are simple but loaded with hope and just a pinch of terror. Will your crush finally notice you? Or are you fated to wed the village's most persistent turnip farmer? Only the spirits know, and tonight they're taking requests. The most popular method is the nut test. Each girl drops 2 hazelnuts, one for herself, one for her intended, into the hearth. If the nuts leap apart, doomed to drift apart. If they pop together, it's a match made in smoky heaven. If they explode, well, best reconsider your options, and maybe your taste in men. There's also the apple peel game. Peel an apple in one long strip, no pressure. Toss the peel over your left shoulder and hope it lands in the shape of your future spouse's initial. If it looks more like a blob or the number 4, you're destined for a life of confusion or possibly a long career in bookkeeping. The bravest try the mirror trick. At midnight, you sneak away with a candle, stare into the looking glass, and recite the proper incantation, usually something that sounds eerily close to a desperate plea. Supposedly, you'll see the face of your true love appear behind you. What most people see is their own terrified reflection and, occasionally, the family cat who just wants to know when someone's refilling the milk bowl. Boys sometimes get in on the action, but their divinations are a bit more explosive. Tossing rocks at the neighbor's fence, reading omens in the goat's droppings, or interpreting whose boots are the muddiest, all perfectly scientific methods, provided you've had enough ale and a generous imagination. Of course, the adults pretend not to notice any of this. They'll scold the girls for inviting trouble, but they secretly remember their own disastrous attempts, like the year your aunt set her sleeve on fire while trying to see her true love's face in the well, or when the village wise woman predicted she'd marry a knight and instead ended up with 3 kids, 7 pigs, and a chronic turnip allergy. The only thing guaranteed is laughter when the apple peels land in nonsense shapes, when the hazelnuts burn to cinders, when someone screams because they thought their shadow was a spirit. Everyone ends up in a giggling heap. It's a relief after a night of nerves, superstition, and way too many candles threatening to burn the house down. By the end of it, maybe no one knows their destiny for sure, but they've had a moment of hope, silliness, and shared conspiracy under the watchful eyes of ancestors and the ever-judgy family goat. After all, in medieval Halloween, sometimes the best future is the one you get to laugh about tonight and survive until morning. If you've ever complained about your last-minute Halloween costume, you clearly weren't born in the Middle Ages. There's no Spirit Halloween pop-up store, no cardboard box of last year's plastic fangs, and definitely no glitter. Welcome to the original DIY costume party, where fashion is whatever you find at the bottom of the laundry pile, and style points are awarded only if you manage to confuse your own mother. The medieval costume party isn't about looking good. It's about not getting recognized by neighbors, by spirits, or by the ancestors you forgot to pray for last week. On Halloween, everyone from the village wise woman to the smallest child tries to disguise themselves. The reasons? Some hope to blend in with any wandering ghosts. Others just want to dodge a well-aimed turnip from last year's prank victim. Either way, subtlety isn't exactly a medieval strong suit. Let's start with materials. Forget silk, sequins, or anything that might survive a wash. The average costume is built from scratchy wool, hand-me-down linen, and, if you're really creative, the old grain sack nobody wanted to reuse. Turn the sack into a tunic, tie some sticks to your hat, smear soot on your cheeks, and voila, you're either a demon, a lost farmhand, or a very unfortunate root vegetable. Masks are a must, but nobody's shelling out for papier-mâché. Carved turnips, sometimes beets, serve as the original face filters. These lumpy, hollowed-out vegetables are designed to scare off evil and occasionally double as soup ingredients in hard times. Wearing a turnip on your head is not comfortable, fashionable, or good for your hairline, but it's tradition. And, like all medieval traditions, enforced by the one neighbor who takes these things just a little too seriously. If you want to go the extra mile, there's the timeless trick of turning your clothes inside out or wearing them backwards. The theory? Spirits and evil eye can't recognize you if you look like you got dressed in the dark, which, honestly, is true for most days anyway. Bonus. It gives the whole village the unintentional vibe of an experimental theater troupe with a laundry problem. For the truly bold, animal skins make an appearance. Strap on a sheepskin, stick some feathers in your cap, and you're either channeling a pagan spirit or just hoping the wolves get confused and leave you alone. Small children end up bundled in whatever's warmest, resulting in an army of shuffling lumps who may or may not be dressed as future laundry baskets. Every so often, a contest springs up, informal, unspoken, and judged mostly by the loudest person by the fire. Prizes include extra stew, a slightly less lumpy bed, or the honor of being the least recognizable villager for the night. Fashion fails are common. There's always someone who misjudges the length of their tunic and trips into the soul cake, tray, or a mask that slips at the worst possible moment, revealing your identity to the entire crowd, and, presumably, any lurking spirits. Despite all the awkwardness, the costume parade is a highlight. It's the one night where looking absurd is expected, and everyone, from the Lord's daughter to the goat boy, is on equal footing. Laughter, teasing, and the occasional startled scream make the evening feel more like a festival and less like a supernatural gauntlet. By the end of the night, faces are smudged, clothes are even more rumpled, and the vegetable masks are quietly recycled back into tomorrow's soup. But for a few hours, you weren't just another villager. You were unrecognizable, untouchable, and, at least by medieval standards, ready for your close-up, even if it's only seen by candlelight and easily spooked sheep. Of all the things you might expect at a medieval Halloween gathering, soul cakes, sooty disguises, and enough superstition to fill the churchyard, there's one visitor nobody really wants to see. Death. Not just a metaphor or a scary story, but the actual, walking around, bone-rattling spectre that haunts every medieval mind, lurking somewhere between the stew pot and the soup bones. On All Hallows Eve, death isn't just a fact of life. Tonight, it's a guest of honor. It starts with the decorations. Forget cheerful pumpkins and paper bats. The medieval approach is more direct. Bones, skulls, and the occasional artistically arranged pile of old shoes. Village pageants and church plays feature death as a starring character. striding through the crowd in a homemade skeleton suit, clacking two sticks together and occasionally scaring the turnip masks off small children. It's the original jump scare, and nobody pretends not to be spooked. Death, personified, is a regular feature in medieval stories, songs, and, on Halloween, the local gossip circuit. People know it well. Death is part of the scenery, sometimes lurking by the obressums and altar, hearth, sometimes peeking through the door, always somewhere in the corner of your eye. The whole point of Halloween, after all, is to face your fear. You pay tribute to the ancestors, you light candles against the night, and you laugh nervously in the face of mortality, preferably from a safe distance with a strong drink in hand. But the line between joke and reality is thin. Everyone has a story about the time death came calling. A bad harvest, a sudden illness, a neighbor who tripped over his own goats and never quite looked right again. The village priest uses the moment to remind everyone that no man knows the hour, and every grandmother quietly hopes it's not tonight. If there's ever a time to double-check your charms, say an extra prayer, or bribe the priest with the last of your cider, this is it. Death's presence is everywhere. In the bone-littered graveyard, in the wax drips that look just a bit too much like a skull, in the rattling wind that shakes the shutters. Medieval villagers don't talk about if death will visit. Only when, and, on Halloween, now always seems more possible. The children try to outdo each other with tales of the skeleton who came for supper, or the black-clad shadow seen lurking by the well. Parents listen, smile, and then sneak a nervous glance over their shoulder. Sometimes, death is a warning. Sometimes, it's just a part of life, a neighbor who never quite leaves. Pageants end with the skeleton giving a bow and reminding the crowd, "Memento mori, remember you must die." It sounds morbid, but there's an odd comfort in the reminder. Life is short, full of feasts and famines, tricks and treats. Even death, for one night, is invited to join the dance. So you raise a cup to the uninvited guest, hoping he stays outside the circle of firelight, and share a laugh at the old stories. If you're wise, you'll sneak an extra soul cake to the edge of the table, just in case. Because in the medieval world, death is always near, sometimes in the shadows, sometimes in the crowd, and sometimes wearing a borrowed cloak and clacking sticks in the village square. When you finally crawl into bed, the stories and shadows swirling in your head, you know that you've faced the ultimate guest, and, for one more night, lived to tell the tale. In the Middle Ages, that's what you call a good Halloween. If you've ever felt a little self-conscious about your carved pumpkin not looking quite like the Pinterest photos, spare a thought for medieval villagers, because they didn't even have pumpkins. The orange orbs of autumnal glory that now dominate October didn't arrive in Europe until centuries later, long after the first medieval soul had tried to carve a grimace into something much, much less festive. Enter the turnip, the beet, and, on a particularly desperate year, a potato with attitude. Halloween decorations in medieval Europe were a masterclass in making do with what you had. And what you had was mostly root vegetables and a dream. Forget cheerful jack-o'-lanterns. Try hollowing out a turnip after a hard day in the fields, with nothing but a blunt knife and a lot of resentment. The result was less festive lantern and more tiny vegetable cryptid with unresolved trauma. When the fire burned low and a single, flickering candle was jammed inside, these turnip lanterns projected shadows that could frighten small children, livestock, and even the neighbor's bravest goat. The envy was real, though they didn't know it yet. Medieval villagers poured their creative anxieties into these lumpy, bug-eaten canvases, muttering about how much easier it would be if only some mysterious, massive orange fruit existed. The stories of spirits being repelled by a grotesque root with a toothy grin probably started because someone, somewhere, desperately wanted their handiwork to be effective. After all, if you were a wandering ghost and you saw that thing in a window, you'd move along too. Sometimes, the village would compete, unofficially, of course, for the most terrifying lantern, the prize. Bragging rights, mild respect, and the hope that this year your house wouldn't be haunted by Aunt Mildred's vengeful spirit. Kids would line up their tiny, misshapen turnip heads along the windowsill, each one more grotesque than the last. If one collapsed or burst into flames before midnight, it was taken as a very clear sign. Next year, more beet, less turnip. Of course, there were practical difficulties. Turnips are stubborn, dense, and rarely hollow out gracefully. The smell, once a candle started to cook the inside, was enough to drive away all but the most persistent ancestor. The beets added a touch of horror, red, waxy drips running down the sides, like something from a vegetable-themed crime scene. If you were truly unfortunate, someone might carve a face into a rutabaga, which, by morning, looked like it was melting into existential despair. But necessity is the mother of invention, and medieval people were nothing if not inventive. The lanterns served their purpose, marking homes, guiding lost souls, and, most importantly, giving everyone an excuse to mock each other's artistic attempts. "Nice turnip, Thomas," someone would say, eyeing the lopsided creation on the neighbor's sill. "Did it come that way? Or did you anger the spirit of agriculture again?" Modern pumpkin envy might involve comparing carving skills or Instagram likes. But in the Middle Ages, it was about making the best of your meager produce, and maybe scaring away more than just ghosts. When pumpkins finally arrived in Europe, people embraced them with the enthusiasm of someone who's spent their whole life carving faces into bricks. So next time you struggle with your jack-o'-lantern, remember the medieval villagers, hunched over their root vegetables, turning frustration and fear into something that, for one night, burned brighter than the darkness, and definitely smelled weirder. In their own lumpy, gnarly way, those lanterns were proof. You don't need pumpkins to light up Halloween, just a stubborn spirit and a willingness to try. If you think Halloween is expensive now, with bags of candy, elaborate costumes, and enough plastic skeletons to fill a castle, try celebrating in the Middle Ages, where every penny counted and the cost of a bad Halloween could haunt your finances all year. Yes, medieval people worried about their wallets too. And Halloween was less about fun-sized treats and more about who could squeeze a little profit out of all that delicious fear. Start with the basics, candles. If you wanted to keep the spirits out, you needed plenty of light. Candle makers, those rare villagers with a steady supply of tallow and enough patience to smell like sheep fat all year, suddenly became the toast of the town. The price of even the saddest lump of wax crept up as the night approached. Forget a pumpkin spice latte. In the Middle Ages, the real luxury was a beeswax candle that didn't make your house smell like burnt mutton. The next big winners, bakers. Soul cakes didn't bake themselves, and every household needed a tray or two. Even if you usually scrimped on flour, sugar, and spices, this was the one night you couldn't skimp without risking supernatural revenge. Bakers raised prices, then invented soul cake specials that were definitely just yesterday's bread with a new name. If you were too busy or too lazy to bake your own, you'd pay handsomely to avoid having your ancestors haunt your dreams or your neighbor's children prank your house. And then there's the local priest. No one knows how to monetize fear quite like someone with a direct line to the afterlife. Special prayers for the dead? That'll be a small donation. A blessing for your house to keep out restless souls? Pay up. An extra long midnight mass to make sure the saints remember your name? better drop a few coins in the poor box, which, suspiciously, always ends up funding new vestments. Priests knew that a scared villager is a generous one, especially when sleep and salvation are both on the line. Let's not forget the wise woman or the resident charm seller. These entrepreneurial spirits were ready with bundles of dried herbs, protective amulets, and guaranteed anti-ghost powders, which looked suspiciously like dirt and maybe a bit of chicken feather. For the low price of a loaf of bread or a hunk of cheese, she'd hand you a rowan branch and tell you exactly where to hang it for maximum protection. Most people didn't believe in her magic until their neighbor's lantern went out, and a mysterious draft swept through the house. Even the kids got in on the action. Soul cake singers might pocket a few extra treats, or, if they were clever, run a prank-based extortion racket. Nice firewood pile you've got there. Would be a shame if someone rearranged it. In the hustle and bustle, some of the best profits were made by those who traded in information, secrets, or just the promise of not telling the priest that your lantern was actually made from a beet. Of course, at the end of the night, most villagers were left counting their losses. Extra candles burned away, flour bins scraped empty, and more than a few coins lighter from all those necessary bribes and baked goods. But if you'd avoided a haunting, a prank, or the dreaded curse of bad luck all winter, it was worth every penny. So, as you sit by the fire, wallet a little thinner but spirit intact, you can take comfort in knowing that in medieval times, just like today, Halloween was a business. The only difference? You never quite knew if your payment would please the spirits or just your neighbor's pockets. Medieval villagers didn't just worry about ghosts haunting their homes. Sometimes, it seemed like the animals had joined the supernatural parade. If your Halloween plans involved a quiet evening with your cow, think again. In a world where superstition ruled, every unexplained moo, cluck, or sideways glance from a goat was a potential omen. And nothing made Halloween quite as memorable as the year the chickens started acting weird. The signs were everywhere. A sheep refusing to leave the barn, must be hiding from a ghost. Cows bellowing at midnight. Obviously, someone forgot to bake enough soul cakes. If a chicken laid an egg with a funny shape, you'd hear whispers about witches, curses, or maybe just bad feed. But why tempt fate with logic? Even the family dog got extra attention. If it barked at the corner where the shadows gathered, no one questioned its instincts. After all, animals were believed to see what people couldn't. Spirits, demons, or great Grandpa Reginald coming back to check if anyone ever fixed that broken fence. Halloween was peak season for livestock drama. People kept a sharp eye out for anything unusual. A goat with cold feet? Better sprinkle some holy water. The cat staring at a wall for hours, clearly communing with the afterlife. Or possibly just plotting something, as cats do. If your horse refused to step past a certain tree, everyone made a note not to go near it, at least not until spring. It wasn't just idle gossip. There were rituals for haunted animals. The local wise woman might be called in, waving a bundle of herbs and muttering prayers in half-remembered Latin, just to make sure the barn was ghost-free. Some families left a soul cake in the stables, just in case. Others hung rowan branches or iron nails above the stalls, while the particularly anxious tried to bribe the cows with an extra mash of oats. You never knew which would please the spirits, but nobody wanted to risk sour milk for the rest of the winter. Poultry had its own share of mysteries. Chickens who stopped laying eggs, ducks who quacked at nothing, or geese who marched in circles were considered especially suspect. There are stories, always told after a few ales, of the infamous Halloween when every hen, the village roosted on the priest's roof, refusing to come down until sunrise. Was it a mass haunting? A sign from above? Or just a flock with a sense of humor? No one dared investigate. Better to blame the supernatural than admit your animals just enjoyed a good prank. Sometimes, livestock became scapegoats for human mistakes. If your harvest failed, or the cheese curdled, it was easier to point at a possessed goat than admit you left the barn door open. And when the night grew quiet and the wind howled, every twitchy animal became another excuse to gather close, swap stories, and reassure each other that, yes, it was probably just spirits, and not, say, bad hygiene or poor animal husbandry. By the end of Halloween, the animals were exhausted. The people were exhausted. And the village had a dozen new stories to add to its collection of supernatural lore. Whether or not your livestock was actually haunted didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that, for one magical night, anything was possible. Even a rooster who crowed at midnight just to remind everyone he was the most dramatic creature in the barn. And as you drift to sleep, listening to the last nervous bleat or cluck, you know one thing for sure. In the Middle Ages, every creature, 2 legs, 4 legs, or feathered, had a part to play in Halloween's peculiar pageant of fear and fun. After the chaos of medieval Halloween, ghost-proofing your hovel, keeping your livestock from being possessed, and counting every candle stub twice, the village wakes up to the dawn of All Saints' Day. If you thought Halloween was the hard part, welcome to the medieval version of a hangover. Sore feet, empty cupboards, and a strange sense that someone rearranged your firewood while you weren't looking. The morning is slow. No one wants to get out of bed, not even the chickens. You're stiff from sleeping in a circle with your entire family, arms numb from clutching the broom for protection. The fire is nearly out. The room smells like old tallow and half-burned turnip, and the dog is still eyeing the doorway with suspicion. If you manage to avoid being haunted, pranked, or out-gossiped by your ancestors, you count yourself lucky, and you also count your remaining soul cakes. Spoiler, there aren't many left. All Saints' Day is meant to be holy and solemn. But after last night, everyone is a little ragged. There's a quiet scramble to sweep up straw, relight the hearth, and find enough clean clothes that don't smell of burnt vegetables or, worse, sheep. The church bell rings with extra enthusiasm, as if the priest is determined to scare away any ghosts still loitering or just wants to wake up the entire parish out of spite. Everyone files into church, trying to look more pious and less sleep-deprived than their neighbors. The service is a marathon of prayers, hymns, and saintly reminders about the proper way to honor the dead. The children fidget, the elders doze, and the priest keeps a sharp eye out for anyone nodding off in the back pew. You give thanks that the church smells more like incense and less like haunted cabbage. Every so often, someone sneezes, an echo of last night's chill air and not, you hope, a lingering ghost. Outside, the aftermath of Halloween is everywhere. Sooty footprints by the hearth, a turnip lantern slumping sadly on the windowsill, and chickens still refusing to go near the barn. You check the firewood pile and discover it has, in fact, been rearranged. Whether by spirits, pranksters, or just the wind, no one knows. Someone's laundry is hanging in a tree. The neighbor's goat is wearing a garlic necklace. Everyone exchanges awkward glances and shrugs it off with, "It's just All Hallows custom." Neighbors gather to swap stories, compare misadventures, and gently tease anyone who ended up on the wrong side of a prank. There's talk of mysterious noises, haunted bread, and the suspicious behavior of old Nan's rooster, who apparently tried to lead a midnight parade. It's a communal sigh of relief and a quiet admission that, for all the fear, at least they got through it together. By midday, everyone is already planning for next year, vowing to bake more cakes, buy better candles, and maybe, just maybe, sleep with their feet toward the door. The aches, lost socks, and haunted livestock will fade. But the stories will get better and weirder. With each retelling, so, as the sun sets on All Saints' Day, the village returns to something like normal. You survived the longest, strangest night of the year with little more than cleverness, stubbornness, and a generous helping of luck. And while you might not have all your firewood, you do have new tales, shared laughter, and the sweet relief of ordinary life, at least until the next time the veil grows thin and the world feels just a little more haunted. Centuries have passed since the last medieval villager barricaded their hovel against a night of restless spirits. But if you listen closely, really listen, you'll notice we're still doing the same old Halloween dance. Sure, our costumes come from department stores instead of dusty trunks. Our lanterns are plump, orange pumpkins and not traumatized root vegetables, and our soul cakes have mostly turned into fun-size candy bars. But the legacy of fear that haunted those October nights never quite left us. If anything, we've just found new ways to keep the tradition alive. Why are we still spooked? Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's human nature. Maybe it's the simple thrill of telling stories in the dark and pretending, just for a moment, that the impossible might be possible. In the Middle Ages, fear was everywhere. In the wind rattling the shutters, in the flickering shadows, in the unexplained creak just outside the door, you'd bake offerings, light candles, and tell tales not just to keep the spirits away, but to reassure yourself and your family that you were doing everything right, even if right changed with every new superstition. Even now, Halloween is a night when we let fear out to play. We decorate our porches with skeletons, fill our homes with fake cobwebs, and carve faces that grin or grimace into the darkness. Children dress up and wander the night, just like their medieval ancestors did, hoping for treats and watching for tricks. We watch horror movies, visit haunted houses, and tell each other stories that make us jump, even though we know there's nothing in the closet except the winter coats and that embarrassing sweater from last year. But at the heart of it, there's something soothing about these rituals. They're a way of facing down our worries, about the unknown, about what lurks just out of sight, about all the things we can't control. In medieval times, people faced very real dangers: famine, plague, cold, angry spirits, angry neighbors, and, occasionally, a very angry goat. They responded with community, tradition, and a lot of creative noise. The laughter around the bonfire, the prayers in the candlelight, the shared meal of soul cakes and whatever else survived the pantry, all of it was meant to make life just a little less scary. We still need that. Sure, our monsters wear different masks, but gathering together, sharing stories, making a little light in the darkness, these are the tools we use to remind ourselves that we're not alone, that we're still here, and that, with a little humor, we can face whatever the night brings. So as you tuck yourself in a world blessed with central heating, soft bedding, and the knowledge that no actual ancestor is coming to critique your home decor, give a quiet nod to the past. Halloween endures not because we're terrified, but because we're human. And, let's be honest, because it's the one time of year it's socially acceptable to eat 20 mini candies and blame it on the spirits. The medieval legacy of fear lingers not in the things that go bump in the night, but in the laughter, stories, and gentle togetherness that rise up to meet them. And maybe, just maybe, that's the best protection of all now, as it was then. In a medieval village, group activities generally meant hauling firewood, chasing escaped pigs, or pretending you didn't see the tax collector lurking by the well. But on Halloween night, things got weirdly psychological. That's when the whole village would come together, not just to pray or eat, but to talk about feelings, about the dearly departed, and about whose fault it was that the oatcakes tasted like anxiety. Welcome to the world's earliest, most chaotic group therapy session, a gathering that, quite by accident, ended up looking a lot like a séance. It usually started innocently enough. Someone would suggest lighting an extra candle for the ancestors. Someone else would recall a spooky tale about Aunt Mildred and her ghostly bread. Soon, the entire family, plus a few neighbors, would be crowded into the smoky main room, staring at the flickering fire and sharing every suspicion, regret, and lingering grudge they'd been nursing since Lent. Medieval villagers didn't have therapists, but they did have opinions. The conversation quickly turned into a confessional. Who forgot to leave out soul cakes? Who never visits grandma's grave? Who secretly blames old Nan for last year's crop failure? There was a lot of nervous laughter, a lot of side-eye, and an unspoken agreement that any tears would be blamed on the smoke, not on feelings. Somewhere along the line, someone would get the idea to actually reach out to the ancestors. After all, if the veil was thin and the spirits were close, why not ask them a few questions? Was Great-Uncle Wulfric really hiding coins in the garden? Did anyone actually enjoy last year's turnip soup? And most importantly, which family member kept moving the firewood? The attempt at spiritual contact was never subtle. It mostly involved a lot of chanting, some off-key singing, and a brave soul closing their eyes and dramatically announcing, "I feel a presence." Sometimes a candle would flicker, or a draft would rattle the door, and everyone would gasp, sure that Aunt Mildred was finally going to comment on the curtains. More often, it was just the cat knocking over a mug or a child sneaking another soul cake. Children watched, wide-eyed, both thrilled and terrified that someone's ghost might actually show up. Parents tried to keep things light, but you could see the tension on every face. Nobody wanted to be the one who forgot an offering, or who accidentally invited the wrong spirit to dinner. If the fire sputtered or the door creaked, everyone paused, eyes wide, hearts pounding, and instantly agreed it was time for another story or another round of bread. By the end of the night, the only thing truly summoned was a long list of family grievances and half a dozen new ghost stories. Still, the village left the gathering feeling oddly lighter. After all, group therapy, medieval style, meant sharing your worries, blaming the cat, and laughing together until you forgot, at least for a while, that the world outside was full of things you couldn't control. And if the ancestors heard any of it, well, hopefully they were amused, too. Maybe they even whispered a secret or two, just to keep things interesting next year. In the end, nothing brought a village together like a night spent talking to the dead, confessing to the living, and blaming the cat for everything else. The original séance may have been an accident, but the sense of community, awkward, noisy, and slightly superstitious, was the best kind of magic. If you've ever wondered why medieval villagers saw so many ghosts, monsters, and mildly aggressive vegetables on Halloween, the answer might be lurking in their bread box. In the world before preservatives, refrigeration, and best-by dates, bread didn't just get stale, it got weird. Enter ergot, the infamous fungus that turned ordinary rye into an unintentional party favor, giving a whole new meaning to bread of life. Ergot poisoning, sometimes called St. Anthony's fire, was a real risk, especially in cool, damp climates where rye was a staple. This fungus did more than make bread taste off. It contained alkaloids that could trigger muscle spasms, burning sensations, and, most memorably, vivid hallucinations. So, when the villagers gathered for Halloween, not only were they dodging spirits, they were also fending off the after effects of the lunch they'd just eaten. Picture the scene. You're sitting by the hearth, shadows dancing on the walls, and suddenly your neighbor claims to see a ghostly procession heading toward the churchyard. The wise woman insists it's a sign from the ancestors. The priest reads it as a warning to repent. The children are convinced the cat has started speaking Latin. You just wonder if that second slice of rye was a mistake. It wasn't all horror, of course. Sometimes the bread-induced visions were entertaining. Medieval diaries, the few that exist and survived being used as kindling, describe villagers seeing glowing lights, dancing skeletons, or the local tax collector sprouting horns and tail. For a few hours, or sometimes days, the world seemed charged with magic. And even the most skeptical peasant might catch a glimpse of something odd. If you felt brave, you chalked it up to the thinning of the veil. If not, you swore off rye for a week and started eyeing the turnip supply. The effects of mouldy bread turned ordinary moments into tales that lasted generations. A barn owl flying through the mist? That's not just a bird. It's a harbinger of fate, glowing a bit more than usual tonight. Strange noises from the root cellar? Definitely goblins, or possibly the potatoes staging a revolt. If you tripped over the cat and landed in the ashes, it was easier to blame the bread and the spirits than your own clumsiness. Of course, not everyone believed in the supernatural explanation. There was always that one neighbor, call him Medieval Mike, who insisted, "It's just bad grain, Agnes." But nobody liked a killjoy, especially when your cousin was halfway through describing the dancing goats in the yard. So, people learned to accept that, on Halloween, reality itself was negotiable, and a little bit of mold could turn any evening into a legendary tale. If someone did get a little too wild, the wise woman would suggest remedies: cold water, prayers, and avoiding rye for a while. Sometimes, a family would cleanse the house by throwing out all the suspicious bread, a ritual both spiritual and sanitary. And by morning, most folks agreed that whatever happened in the night was better left as a mystery, one to be retold around the fire next year. So, if you ever feel bad about your own midnight snacks, remember the medieval villagers and their mouldy rye. Their haunted nights were often fueled as much by fungi as by fear, and as the candlelight flickered and the shadows danced, every hallucination, vision, and bread-fueled ghost story made Halloween just a little more magical and a lot more memorable. In every medieval village, there's always one figure who can be counted on to liven up the Halloween festivities: the village drunk. Some say he's just very enthusiastic about local ales. Others whisper that he has a special arrangement with the tavern keeper. Either way, on Halloween night, he's guaranteed to be at the center of the action. Sometimes literally, sometimes sprawled in the road. The night always begins with good intentions. The villagers gather in the square, torches blazing, soul cakes in hand, ready to honor the ancestors and scare off whatever spirits might be lurking in the mist. But as midnight approaches and the bonfire roars higher, it's only a matter of time before the village drunk, lantern in hand, volunteers to lead the annual midnight procession. No one's quite sure what the procession is meant to accomplish. Maybe to guide the souls, maybe to confuse the ghosts, or maybe just to give everyone an excuse to parade around in their worst costumes. The procession is a sight to behold. Children wrapped in blankets, adults shuffling in mismatched shoes, the wise woman muttering prayers, and a handful of pranksters carrying the last surviving turnip lanterns. And at the front, always, is the village drunk, staggering but determined, shouting half-remembered chants and swinging his lantern with the confidence of someone who has absolutely no idea where he's going. This is where the legend begins. One year, no one agrees which, the village drunk led the procession off the main path and into the fields, promising a shortcut to the churchyard. Instead, he wandered into Farmer Cuthbert's pasture, tripped over a suspiciously fluffy obstacle, and set off a chain reaction that no one would soon forget. Out of the darkness came a sheep, eyes shining in the lantern light, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of an animal who knew it was about to become famous. The sheep didn't just walk. According to some, it floated. Others swore it let out a ghostly bar that echoed through the mist like a warning from the underworld. In the confusion, the villagers, already nervous from too many ghost stories and not enough sleep, panicked. Someone screamed. Someone else dropped the soul cakes. And the village drunk, certain he'd summoned a spirit, fled straight into the duck pond. By morning, the story had grown tenfold. The phantom sheep was now the spirit of a wronged ancestor, or perhaps a cursed animal doomed to wander until someone fixed the church roof. Children dared each other to visit the haunted pasture. The wise woman suggested leaving an offering of oats and maybe a little ale to keep the sheep's spirit calm, and the village drunk, now a local celebrity, claimed he'd saved the whole village from a spectral stampede. The legend stuck. Every Halloween since, the midnight procession pauses at the edge of Cuthbert's field, just in case the phantom sheep decides to return. A lantern is swung 3 times, a soul cake is left on the fence post, and everyone tries very hard not to trip over anything woolly. The sheep, for its part, seems content to munch grass and enjoy its notoriety. So if you ever find yourself in a medieval village on Halloween night, and you hear a mysterious bar drifting through the fog, don't be alarmed. It's probably just the legend getting bigger and a sheep enjoying its annual moment of supernatural fame. In a world filled with real terrors, sometimes the scariest thing of all is a tipsy neighbor and an imaginative flock. Staying safe on Halloween meant following a confusing set of local rules. Never whistle after dark, don't look a black dog in the eyes, and for heaven's sake, never accept a stew invitation from anyone who rhymes. Break a rule, and you'd be the next cautionary tale recited by the fire, complete with interpretive dance by your least favorite cousin. If you think modern Halloween comes with a lot of rules, don't eat unwrapped candy, stick to sidewalks, avoid clowns, you haven't seen anything yet. For medieval villagers, surviving All Hallows Eve meant memorizing a tangled web of rules, customs, and just-in-case rituals. Forget to follow even one, and, according to local law, you'd be haunted by everything from ghosts to gossip for the rest of the year. Rule number 1: never whistle after dark. Whistling, it was said, called the spirits straight to your door. The only thing worse? Singing the wrong song, especially anything with lyrics about the harvest going badly. There's always one neighbor who can't resist, and everyone pretends not to notice when their chickens act weird for a week. Rule number 2: don't look a black dog in the eyes. Black dogs were considered omens, sometimes protectors, more often messengers from the other side. If you locked eyes, you risked inviting bad luck, a minor possession, or, at minimum, a year's worth of unpleasant dreams. Best to avert your gaze and offer a discreet bit of bacon if you had any handy. Rule number 3: don't go out alone. Halloween is a team sport. Groups are safer, ghosts prefer solitary targets. Or so the stories go. Children huddled together, clutching scraps of bread, muttering nervous prayers, and occasionally comparing which ancestor they most wanted to avoid. Adults moved in tight clusters, trading jokes to keep their courage up and keeping a careful eye on that one cousin who always tries to sneak off for mischief. Rule number 4: never accept a stew invitation from someone who rhymes. This one's oddly specific, but it's based on the story of a wandering peddler who lured villagers with clever verse and left them lost in the woods for hours. Anyone who speaks in rhyme tonight is immediately suspect, and probably just angling for extra soul cakes. Rule number 5: mind your thresholds. Doorways are the spiritual bottleneck. Sweep them clean, sprinkle salt, and never, ever step into your own house left foot first on Halloween. It's bad luck, and at least 2 grandmothers will remind you loudly if you forget. Bonus points if you hang a rowan branch or old iron key above the door. Rule number 6. Do not, under any circumstances, sleep facing away from the door. It's said that spirits prefer the element of surprise, and no one wants to wake up with a cold draft and the feeling that someone or something is watching. The safest position? Sleeping in a circle, all eyes out, feet in, like a mildly paranoid daisy. The list goes on. Don't spill the salt. Don't lend out your broom. Never say, "I'm not scared" out loud. Don't joke about the wise woman's cat. For every new tale, a new rule appears, usually created on the spot to explain last year's disaster, or to avoid repeating it. The result is a night of nervous choreography. Every villager dances to a rhythm of superstition, dodging bad luck, overcompensating with charms, and giving each other a healthy amount of side-eye. By sunrise, you're exhausted, rulebook shredded, and still not entirely sure if you did everything right. But that's medieval Halloween for you, a delicate balance of fear, ritual, and communal wisdom passed down in stories, warnings, and a surprisingly high number of rules about soup. You follow them just in case, because survival isn't guaranteed. But at least you'll have something new to talk about next year. For most of the year, writing a will is something best left for old age, a bad fever, or that moment you realize your neighbor has been eyeing your best goat a little too hungrily. But as Halloween approached in the Middle Ages, even the healthiest villager started thinking about afterlife insurance, just in case the spirits weren't in a forgiving mood. If you thought modern life insurance ads were ominous, try living in a world where you never know when you'll need it could mean tonight. The days before All Hallows Eve saw a sudden surge in legal activity. The village scribe, usually occupied with translating tax records or penning awkward love notes, became the busiest person in town. Families lined up outside his door, clutching bundles of onions, eggs, and the occasional wriggling chicken as payment for a few lines of official-sounding parchment. The scene was less dignified than you'd imagine. Someone always tried to dictate their will while the scribe's ink froze, or the neighbor's goat chewed on last year's paperwork. Most wills were refreshingly practical. To my son, the good shovel and the less good boots. To my daughter, the family spoon and the patchwork quilt. To the priest, 1 egg, payable if I do not rise from my grave. The instructions for burial were particularly detailed around Halloween. Bury me facing east, with garlic in each pocket and a candle in my left hand, just to be safe. The village wise woman was often consulted to add a final line, something cryptic, like "Let no ill wind find me, nor bad stew trouble my rest." Some families took things even further, burying small valuables in the garden with a map left for the worthy, a medieval version of a treasure hunt, assuming the map didn't end up as kindling. There were also those who believed the dead could come back for unfinished business, so debts were hastily paid, fences mended, and apologies offered for that unfortunate cheese incident last Lent, all in the hope that, if the worst happened, the ancestors would pass by with a nod instead of a haunting. Wills weren't just about property. They were a last, hopeful attempt at controlling chaos. A way to say, "I'm prepared, spirits, so maybe bother someone else." It gave peace of mind. Even if the instructions ranged from the sensible, "Do not sell my hat to the miller," to the eccentric, "Release 3 frogs at dawn in my memory, but only if the moon is full." For a single night, everyone took the future seriously, even those who'd spent the rest of the year ignoring advice and tempting fate with reckless abandon. The village priest, naturally, encouraged this behavior, A well-prepared will meant fewer arguments at the graveyard and more donations for prayers and candles. The poor scribe went hoarse from all the extra dictation, and for a few blessed days, even the local lawyer's jokes got a polite chuckle. By the time Halloween arrived, every responsible villager had their affairs in order, or at least enough written down to keep the family goat out of probate court. If nothing else, it was a chance to gather the family, share stories, and remind each other that life is unpredictable, but you might as well meet it with a good plan, a sound will, and a little extra garlic. Because in the Middle Ages, the best afterlife insurance was a well-written will and a healthy respect for whatever might be lurking just beyond the candlelight. So tonight, as you nestle under your warm covers, with your thermostat set to not frostbite, take a moment to think of those medieval souls who stared down Halloween with nothing but a drafty hut, a half-burnt candle, and a suspicious turnip carved with more hope than skill. They didn't have pumpkin spice, binge-worthy horror movies, or even reliable socks, but somehow they survived. Year after chilly, terrifying year. Remember, their nights were filled with real mysteries. Footsteps on the thatch, flickers in the mist, ancient superstitions whispered over firelight, and the knowledge that sometimes the scariest thing in the dark wasn't a ghost, but your own hungry stomach. They layered on rags, huddled together, and prayed that the souls of the dead, and maybe that angry neighbor they forgot to appease, would pass them by just one more time. But here's the thing. Even when the cold crept in and the shadows grew too long, people didn't give up. They baked, joked, chanted, and invented the first ever Do Not Disturb sign, written in Latin and pinned to their doors with old bits of sausage. They faced the night together, trusting that the sun would rise and that next year, someone else could be the ghost. So as you drift off to sleep in a world with indoor plumbing, bug-free sheets, and not a single haunted sheep in sight, maybe whisper a thank you to the stubborn, clever, and occasionally superstitious ancestors who made it through All Hallows Eve, so you could enjoy yours with nothing scarier than a neighbor's inflatable witch. History may be messy, gross, and full of turnip-related trauma, but it's also a story of resilience. Sleep well, knowing that whatever the night brings, you're a little safer, a little warmer, and definitely less likely to be haunted by a cabbage. Good night, and happy dreaming.